Hello, and this is Dustin DaHusky, and I kind of want to continue on classic cars, or at least expectations when owning a classic car, some things to look for. There might be a few other videos after this one, just stuff that kind of pops in my mind. Um, just stuff that I think is going to be important for those looking for a classic car, anything 20 to 25 years old. So, there's actually something important that every classic car owner should always have. And I'm going to show you right now. All right. And can I do that? Perfect. All right, so what do we have here? We have let's see, this is actually a electric generator or alternator booklet. Of course, you've got too much auto cruise control, automatic climate control, a body service manual, because GM, body by Fisher, actually meant something. They didn't produce their own bodies. Yes, it was produced by GM, but not in factory. They didn't start producing their own bodies until the late 70s. And then, of course, a chassis service manual, which is, I think, actually, this is a full-on 1967 Buick chassis manual. I think. Anyway, so you're definitely going to need something regarding chassis, something regarding body. Unless you have a car that combines the two, then great, because you know what? That kind of help is going to be indispensable. I'm also going to tell you this. Cars from the 80s and onward will not have service manuals this comprehensive. Nothing from the 80s and prior or after will ever have a comprehensive way on how to disassemble your car nut to nut. Because the further back you go for cars, classic cars, the thicker the manuals, and more likely you're going to have a much more fun time repairing your car than something like a Cavalier J-body paging through a Chilton's or Haynes and then still getting pissed off. I've fixed my car so many times with these two manuals alone. My car still runs. And I'm not a very patient person. I'm not a very patient Husk. These two manuals alone, which explains why this one has no cover page anymore, because you know what? That yeeted itself decades ago. And then, of course, automatic climate control, which my car does not actually have, but it does have a system for the air conditioner, the heater box controls, and other things. So, not really. My specific car does not have an automatic climate control. It was an option. Mine's more manual climate control, but there's a lot from the automatic control that kind of... there's some overlap between the automatic and the manual, except they decided to make two manuals of sort of the same system, but a lot of the parts from my car are actually quite interchangeable by that degree. Auto cruise control, I don't have that in my car. I bought it because I thought it was cool, but it also has a bit of some transmission diagrams that, some transmission and wiring diagrams that does come in handy. So while I don't have auto cruise control, some of the stuff in that manual actually does come in handy. And this helped me so much trying to determine fusible links. This has actually really come in handy. Look at that. That little person with a head, he's flying away. And this is actually a time when they called an alternator a generator. They also called it a Delcotron back in the day. It's pretty fascinating stuff. This stuff is going to help you literally uh, troubleshoot any bit of issue you may have with your car. Rotors, all this stuff really came handy. Your plugs, your coil, which mine lasted 50 years before I crushed the stupid thing, and then I had to replace it. Fortunately, a lot of the stuff, once you look at that Delco Remy, at a time when, and this is from 1964, and oh wait a minute, well actually no, in 1964 GM did come with alternators on all their cars, so that's about right actually. So some of this stuff for a classic car is going to come in handy if you're looking at, let's say 1980 and prior. This kind of stuff is what you're looking for. And if you're really restoring a car, like me and my dad did, you're going to want your paint codes, which we ended up finding this somewhere. I don't even know where. Kind of rare stuff now. You can find it, but it's not as common anymore. My car color is a D-code sapphire blue poly. Or really, it's called blue metallic mist. Or actually, where is it? Some people thought that my car was initially a K-code aquamarine poly, which is another word for kind of saying metallic. However, it's a D-code color car on the tag. So people always mistaken the color being aquamarine when it actually really wasn't. It never was. There's a green mist, there's a gold mist, blue mist. However, I think maybe the colors got mixed up because in some circles D is known as blue metallic mist, which is literally F code. I don't know, I'm going into a tangent. I'm just nerding out about my car. Color codes, because you know what? You might need it to repaint your car or paint your car in whatever color you really want. If you happen to be painting your car, oh yeah. When you have an older car, you are going to be making projects all the time, doing maintenance. Actually, some of the stuff wasn't able to actually get done. Like tires. I want tires. Except finding the tires I need are not that expensive. It's just trying to come up with the money. Yeah, repaint the steel wheels and whatnot. This is just old car stuff and whatnot. New fluids, because you know what? Actually, yeah, an older car, you'd be amazed how long a radiator will last, but it won't last forever. I would say a good 50 years, and then you're kind of toast with one. Then more parts, so then now you're sourcing parts, and you're finding really the cheapest option you can get, at least for an older car. Regardless of how cheap you can go, you can actually get away with cheap. If it's a American classic car, the cheaper you go, you're still fine. Imported cars, I'm talking about, German luxury. If you go cheap with parts, you might have some bad luck with that, but let's see where, oh, here. So here's another example where you will have to find from your chassis service manual, which actually did have a really cool cover. It's just gone, which I kind of want to get a new one or an unused one just to say I have one. But what kind of fluids are you looking for your car? Well, I was able to decode a lot of this stuff, and you know what? Guess which one is the only kind of fluid name or like fluid type from this time period. Actually, there's two. There's actually two that hasn't changed since 1967, besides oil. Power steering fluid and my differential and manual steering gear oil. This literally never changed since 1967 in name until okay, this still exists by name. Oddly enough, power steering fluid, this oddly enough still exists by name today. It's under different names, but it's got a cross number with this on bottles, which I find amazing. There was a specific GM coolant at the time that had a different name, which does not exist anymore. Transmission fluid, which I've found a modern equivalent to Type A ATF. It was some weird off designation. Engine oil was still 5W20. And brake fluid was this weird combination of SAE or just a really weird designation. And the closest I could come to, which brake fluid is sort of brake fluid, but in time or in the past, it's still the same consistency. It's still brake fluid, but it works kind of in different ways. And for older cars, I would say from pre-2000 and before, I think you can get away with .3 on anything. I literally put .3 in a 43 Opel, and its German designation no longer actually exists. It hasn't existed since 1952. And I ended up dumping .3 out of desperation because I needed brake fluid, and you know what? That worked. So when in doubt for an older car, .3 tends to work all right. But definitely do some research, but I would guarantee 8 out of 10. I'm optimistic, but, doesn't always seem to work. 8 out of 10. .3 will work in a lot of older cars. .4, you're going to have some leakage issues, and yeah, pretty much just stick with .3. You'll be fine with that. You could also use, I don't know about .3 in power steering fluid, but I know you can use trans fluid in power steering fluid for older cars. But if you can find specifically what they use for power steering fluid, probably the best. And also, too, in your manual, you will find exactly how much of each is actually needed for your car. Oddly enough, there was nothing for transmission fluid. That was an oddity. And you just need enough bottles just to get through your brake fluid, which they never mentioned volume. So let's talk about engine oil for older cars. And from my experiences in the last 2 decades, changing oil, not regularly, but having changed oil on a lot of old things, like anything from the 19-teens to really modern day shit. Mostly stuff around the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. But 70s, 80s, 90s, I guess you could get away with some leeway. So most modern engine oils have some kind of detergent to it. I don't like using detergent oil in my older engine because of one thing. Detergent oil is meant to clean the crap out of your engine. In an older engine, you don't want that, because you know what's going to happen? You're going to cause leaks. And sometimes no leaks is better than a leak, and if you change your oil to detergent oil, you're probably going to make some leaks. It may be a small leak, or it may be a leaking sieve. I don't know. It's probably not going to be fun for you anyway. So I use conventional straight non-detergent 5W20 because you know what? For my car, this is exactly what it came from the factory. That's probably what I'll run with anyway. But I always choose non-detergent because I don't want to stir up anything in the engine. Really, naturally, you should clean your engine just by changing it. Run the oil in the engine, run it, change your filter, keep going. That's a good way to clean your engine, is just by changing out your oil. and sometimes a bit even more frequently, that's fine. The further back you go with engines, you should never use synthetic. You should never use detergent. You should just use non-detergent, straight conventional oil. Okay, so let's say you have an 80s car. You might be able to get away with synthetic oils. Detergent oils, oh, for sure. You could probably get away with it all the time. You don't have to worry about it. The older the engine you go, you probably are better off using non-detergent oil. 90s cars, you can use synthetic oil anyway. It's because it's designed for it. 1980s car depends on the type of engine and their seals, but for the most part, you can get away with synthetic oil. However, now, changing... So let's see. First, what else do I have here? Oh yeah, so there's more projects and all of your... This is actually a specific sheet for my engine, so it's got the smallest V8, I believe, that Buick was selling that year was the 300 cubic inch V8. And probably the one that's going to last the longest out of them all, because mechanically they're so under load. I never have to worry about this thing actually speccing anything out, so I'm kind of glad about that. But this kind of stuff really does help with just maintaining your car. What was I talking about earlier? Shit. My family is loud. If this phone picks it up, forgive me. Oh, look at that Delcotron. So, oh yeah, so as far as manuals are concerned, it's not a bad idea to pick as many as you can for your car. Going back to engine oil, going between different subjects. My mind is fried after this week. So we know that for older cars before 1980 is my general rule. You're probably better off avoiding detergent, synthetic oil altogether. Just run straight non-detergent conventional oil. So you have a 1980 because that's kind of the overlap. So you can do it or not. Before then, probably I wouldn't suggest it. Afterwards, you can get away with it. In the engine, if you fuck the engine up, you can get another engine. The beauty about 80s cars is that a lot of these parts still exist. My Skylark, I literally have to hunt through several states of junkyards. And that's why I don't take any chances with that. So, you just bought a 1984 Toyota Camry liftback, which is a really cool car, so it's going to be a really cool example. You found a car pampered by some older person, left forgotten in a garage, and you bought it. You have a really cool, rad car. So, you want to do a little bit of some maintenance. However, you want to give it some oil that might maybe help it run smoother. Certainly would probably clean it a little bit better too. But also, you can go a little bit further on the oil change. So you want to go to synthetic. You can certainly do so straight from conventional detergent oil, just ordinary regular oil. You can certainly do it, but the transition period of going from conventional oil to synthetic oil, you can do the switch immediately after dumping conventional oil, changing out the filter, letting it all run out the oil pan, and then capping it up, putting synthetic oil in, and then let that run. What you could do is have some run-in oil after you do the dump of the old oil. If you're going to try to do a somewhat cleaner transition, it's just stuff I just think of. You're still going to have some residual older oil left in the system. You might still have some older sludge that will eventually break up, warm up, loosen up, become more oil as it's being used. So, how long does this normally take? Well, it really depends on how much you drive your car. My best bet is when you dump the old oil, put in some running oil, let the engine run for like 10, 15, 20 minutes. Just give it a good enough time for it to warm up, have engine oil flow throughout the block, through little tiny passageways. Definitely clean up the old engine, probably black with some sludge. Might find some bugs in it because I don't know why. I get lucky with bugs. They just find a way in. Or I'm just special. Like like the Skylark, it's just a special basket case, but it's my basket case with bugs. So in that case, you're really kind of cleaning your engine block on the inside without using any additives, something that might maybe perhaps damage seals, which you don't want to put additives in an older car. I would say even 1990 and after, you might be able to get away with it. While I mentioned with older engines before 1980, you don't want to use high-tech oils because you could, but you run the risk of doing a bit more damage unknowingly. Sludge. Damaging neoprene seals, which were still kind of in use in the 50s and 60s, and some manufacturers used them in some engines well into the 70s, so you really have to do research on that. By the 1980s, they've developed engines and oil enough to where they can coexist. So this transitional period of going from one type of engine oil to another, as far as conventional to synthetic, it may take a few oil changes to make the full switch kind of like work pretty amazingly. I mean, it's still gonna work. It's oil. It's just you're gonna find small amounts of clumps of engine oil from the older type of oil that might start, dropping out. I would say it takes anywhere from about 2 or 3 oil changes of synthetic to really get it to where it is fully cleaned out. And any bit of residual oil from the old conventional oil is fully gone from an engine. It doesn't take long, but it's not instantaneous. It will still take a little short while if you drive your car regularly. If it's a classic, it may not happen for a little while, maybe a year, maybe 2 years. It really depends on how much you drive your car. But if you daily drive a car and you do the switch from conventional motor oil to synthetic, in that case, yeah, it might take a few oil changes, and then after that, then you've converted your car to synthetic, which there's not much converting to be done. It's just you just change oil. However, once you change to synthetic, you're better off sticking with synthetic. You don't want to go back to conventional oil. So, fluids. We just talked about fluids. It's a pretty big thing with a car because you know what? If you don't have engine oil, the thing won't run. It will run. It will seize up. And within 5 minutes, you're not smiling. Transmissions certainly need fluid to work, especially automatic transmissions. The earlier ones need fluid to work because it's all based on tubules or vacuum pressure, not vacuum pressure, but just channels. Just it actually explains in the cruise control. It's all hydraulic in a sense. Nowadays, it's all electronic, so it kind of uses less transmission oil than it did in the past. Back then, you use a lot of transmission fluid. So it's good to know what all of your types of fluids you can find a modern damn it. Pretty much find something that you can cross-reference to a modern fluid that you can safely use within your vehicle, because you know what? Nothing sucks about, well, it all actually sucks when you put in fluid into a vehicle that's not compatible, and you may do unnecessary damage that would literally either would make a really, really bad evening and you end up just looking around for rebuild kits, swapping out the fluid, or finding a new transmission or whatever to replace and then hopefully never forget. Or it could be a really bad year, where if it's an older car, it may take you years before you find an extra unit. I'll tell you this, the further back you go with cars, oh my god, finding a transmission for an Opel is stupid. Especially for an Opel that wasn't really formally imported in this country. So when you're literally looking for parts to a captured vehicle and you're trying to find shift forks to a vehicle never sold here, you're fucked. That's why you want to make sure if you're going to be maintaining your vehicle, do it right. So, onto another subject, structural sense of finding a classic car is to make sure if you're going to be looking for any classic car, if you can get it cheap, look for one that looks fully intact, not totally rusty. I may have mentioned this in the first video, so okay. So what should you really be looking for? Well, if you get the opportunity, definitely look around, look underneath the car, find suspension mounting points, shock towers, shackles, spring seats, anything that a suspension unit piece is attached to the unibody or the frame of the car. See if those are still sturdy. Yeah, they can be rusty, but surface rust shouldn't actually scare you, so as long as the frame is still solid. Or the unibody. It's okay to have a little bit of surface rust. Not a big deal. It's when it's absolutely chews through a metal is when you really have to consider, is this car really worth buying? Because if you have a hole in the floor, you could patch it up if it's the only thing wrong with it, and if the rest of the car is just peachy, it's a small endeavor, but possible. But when you're looking at suspension issues, not just the suspension itself, but what the suspension attaches to the car, when that's kind of gone, the car is not long for this earth. And you're probably better off just leaving it alone. Yeah, car may not run, but you can buy a non-running car if the shell, the frame, the body of the car, the suspension that it's attached to, is all well solid. You could spend a few good weeks with some buddies and learn about stripping apart an engine or transmission to an older car and rebuilding it back together, and then it can be a fun experience or a big pain in the ass. It really depends on the way it really goes, and if, from my experience, a huge pain in the ass. And it's a little bit of fun when it does work, but pain in the ass. So when you're really looking for a car, as I mentioned, like just now, last video, find one in which the frame, body, or unibody, if it's both, if it's a moderate car, make sure that you're buying a really solid car. If it's going to be a project car, make sure that it's not going to be a lot of work done, because you want to make sure that it's a good base to work off of, because if it's Swiss cheesed by Russ, is it really worth saving? Even if it's a cool car, even if it's something that you find fun. There is actually one way. There is actually, in fact, one way around that. You're going to buy two cars. Yes, I said it. So let's say you actually ended up buying a really cool car that is a total shit show as far as structural strength. The engine might be fine. The interior is in fantastic condition. If it's a Midwestern or Northern car, the interior is great. The glass is great. The trim, pretty much everything about the car that is not the body is great. However, you bought a car with a bad shell. But you love the car. But you know you can't save the car. There's some cars that you will find that are total hogs. However, it may not actually be the total end of the world if you can find a second example in the South or in Texas or pretty much the Southwest or the Southeast. You will definitely find various forms of rust-free. You're better off actually buying a Southwest or Southeast car that's relatively rust-free and probably maybe in better mechanical shape, or often enough they have a lot of miles, and you're better off replacing it with the mechanicals of a northern car, the interior of the northern car, ditching the rest on the southern car, except the body, except the very thing that you want to save. Then you have a really pristine example of that car. Even better yet, if you can find the same year and the same exterior color, because sometimes if you really, really, really want to fool people that you have an intact car, is when you have a color scheme, or if you just don't care, do it anyway. You could put a dark blue interior from one exact model but in a different exterior color, putting it into a car with an exterior color that would have never had dark blue interior. But you're going to do it anyway. Probably didn't fit, probably didn't work at the factory. The company probably didn't want you to make that choice anyway. But you know what? Hey, if you can find a car, at least for what you're looking for. Hey, if you're looking for a Chevy Sprint or a Spectrum, and you ended up finding one, which those things are rare as hen's teeth, and you ended up actually finding one in really good shape, and you know it's not going to sit with any purists, that are of a Sprint or a Spectrum, which I'm sure there's probably 3 of them, or 4. You're not going to actually fool, well, actually no, you will fool a lot of people, except for the small people that actually like the cars and realize, whoa, wait a minute, you just mixed an 885 with an 88 Spectrum parts. 88 interior with an 85 exterior mechanicals, whatnot. Although a lot of those cars didn't change mechanically or exteriorly, not much. So, as far as looking for a car, certainly it's what you want to look for. You're looking for a specific type of car. Cool, go for it. But don't buy a total shit show. Yeah, it might be at a good price, but there's a whole reason for that too, where do you really want to buy an 88 Chevy Nova because it's only $500 and it runs, but there's no floor? Do you really want to buy it? Well, if you can buy another one that's in better shape, and if the interior of that one is trashed, you can swap the parts together. Hell, you can make more money by buying the shit show. I can say that on YouTube. Well, actually, this is my own channel. I've been saying all the swears for a while at this point. You can buy a bad shell, transfer the good interior into the good exterior, scrap the bad shell for money, or for whatever scrap value you can get for it, and you can sell the interior components of the southern car that may be a little bit fried but still might be serviceable by someone else. You can still make a little bit of money on top of that. You might actually make, I guess it really depends on the car and all circumstance on what you have. If you have dash plastic that explodes in your hands, you're not going to get much money for it, which for 80s plastic is typical. At least it's not 60s plastic, because there's 2 pieces in my Skylark that is plastic, and again, I'm terrified to touch it just because it looks like chalk at this point. I just don't like to look at it. I'm just afraid that even my eyeball pressure, by looking at it, is going to break it. I'm just glad there's only 3 pieces of plastic in my entire car on the inside, and it's those 2 pieces of plastic underneath the rear armrest and the steering wheel. And the steering wheel is actually much more durable plastic, but it likes to crack. And the dick that decides to actually pull the plastic off the rim of the steering wheel, I will beat you with a fish. A very small fish. Could be frozen. Would make me sad. So, you want to make sure that when you look for a car, you want to be sure that fluids you can find are going to work for your car, because nothing's worse than having no brake fluid and no brake pressure. But you also want to make sure you can get your car working, because you don't want to buy brake DOT. You don't want to buy dot for brake fluid in a car that's probably meant for dot 3 and really, really, really fuck up your brake system, like just really bad. Or put synthetic oil in an older car and then realize there's probably not enough oil pressure to do much with it. Or use detergent engine oil in an older 40s car that has no engine filter, or oil filter, I should say. Really, they became optional in the mid-50s, still optional in the 1960s, didn't really become kind of not just optional, but just standard until really mid-60s with a lot of manufacturers. I'd say by 69, if you didn't have a standard oil filter, what are you doing? But having sludge float around in your engine, swirling around in your engine, clogging up other oil passageways, because you're using detergent oil in a system that probably was better off having sludge being there, you're going to have an incredibly bad time. And you cannot find replacement engines for a 41 Chevy. Yeah, it can fit a V8 in there, but to find an original engine for the time period, oh, you fucked yourself. You want to make sure you're doing something right. When you buy a car, you want to make sure you're not buying a death trap. Because, or, I know someone who actually would buy something from the 80s, drive it around as a daily driven car, then experience the 80s and the 90s again as it dissolves away and right before him, where a picture from 2 years ago shows an incredibly intact car underneath. And then 2 years later in Wisconsin, road salt. And of course, a car from the 80s with no... There's this thing in Wisconsin called Z-Bart. Or any rubberized anti-corrosion coating underneath the car, or just literally just stuff meant to protect the car. Well, it totally chewed up the rear suspension of his car to the point that, yeah, it was totally chewing away through the frame. Not safe. And then he eventually had to he had to junk the car just because it was becoming too unsafe. So, yeah. Probably do a few more videos of anything that does pop up. It's just for some reason I was thinking, hey, here's other stuff that people are going to need to know about an older classic car that they will certainly need to know. Because if you don't know how to look for a brand new car, you are going to be totally lost and screwed looking at an older car. Because I don't want you guys to buy a death trap. And I also don't want you guys to ruin your new prospect by throwing in fluid that probably should not belong in your car anyway for the time period. I'd say a lot of from 1980 and onward, a lot of modern fluids that cars use today you could get away with, but you could really screw things up by putting in stuff that just should not belong there. So I figured just another conversation that came to mind, and I'm sure more will probably pop up because you know what? Classic cars are fun. So anyway, catch you guys next time. Hope you had some form of fun. Hopefully. Maybe. I'll try to entertain you next time. So anyway, thanks guys for listening. Thank you.